Look, Neo, you have to make up your mind to either accept what I am about to tell you, or reject it. But remember, all I am offering you is the truth, nothing more. But unfortunately, no one can be told what the left-right paradigm is. You have to see it for yourself. I am trying to free your mind, but I can only show you the door. You are the one who has to walk through it. Politics is a system, Neo. The system is our enemy. But you have to understand something. Most of the people in the left-right paradigm are not ready to be unplugged. And most of them are so injured, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they fight to protect the very system that enslaves them. You have to let it all go. Fear, doubt, and your cognitive dissonance. Free your mind. The left-right paradigm is all around us. Even now, on this very live stream. You can see it when you turn on your television. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. The truth is that all your whole life you have been told you were free. But like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Into a prison for your mind that you cannot see or touch. But this is your last chance. After this there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, and the story ends. You wake up on a stream pushing the deception of politics. And believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, and I will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Edward Bernays. His uncle was Sigmund Freud. This is the first step in recognizing that you have all been manipulated and programmed. He literally wrote the book on propaganda. Edward Bernays also is considered the father of public relations, otherwise known as PR. Welcome to Brainwashing 101.
When you think about breakfast, does bacon and eggs come to mind?
Because you believe that bacon and eggs were always considered breakfast food. But the truth is that Edward Bernays was hired by people selling bacon to convince people to buy more of it. So now that you realize that you have been programmed and brainwashed, the next question is, what else have you been programmed to think? How many of your long-held beliefs are not even really your own thoughts? And this is the point where you really need to start asking more questions and learn to embrace critical thinking.
And overcome your own cognitive dissonance.
And how many of you ladies smoke cigarettes? Well, you can thank Edward Bernays for that, and any health issues that may arise as a consequence of your tobacco programming. He convinced women that smoking cigarettes would make them thin, and that smoking tobacco would liberate women by calling them freedom torches. Bernays also worked with the CIA to overthrow legitimately elected democratic governments in South America. Eventually, the same psychological warfare was used on our own citizens. Bernays described the masses as irrational and subject to the herd instinct. He outlined how to use crowd psychology and psychoanalysis to control the public by brainwashing them
and controlling their minds.
Now let's talk about the Freemasons, who are just one of many interconnected secret societies. So let's begin with Albert Pike, who wrote Morals and Dogma, which is still required reading for Freemasons. Listen to him praise Lucifer before your cognitive dissonance shuts your mind off. Lucifer, the son of the morning, is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not. Freemasonry is satanic. Now keep that in mind, before you are tempted to go back to the blue pill. Now do you still have your critical thinking caps on? Good, because you are going to need them for this hard truth. And some people cannot handle the truth. The Declaration of Independence was written anonymous on a capron. The father of the country, George Washington, was a Freemason. The founding fathers were Freemasons. And Ben Franklin, specifically, was a member of the Hellfire Club, which was no different than P. Diddy, and the remains of dead children were found buried under his home. The music for the national anthem was written by a Freemason. The White House was designed by a Freemason. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a Freemason. The Stars and Stripes flag was designed by a Freemason. Not Betsy Ross. The Statue of Liberty was designed by a Freemason. Have you bothered to notice the Freemason pyramid or money? Need a reminder that Freemasons worship Lucifer at the higher degrees? Well, just look at the pentagram built into Washington, D.C. And yes, the Capitol was also designed by a Freemason. What about baseball? Our national pastime. You can see the square and compass in the layout of the field, and there is esoteric symbolism in the number 3, like the Masonic third degree. And once you turn 18, which is 3 6s, you get to wear a Masonic cap and gown. That funny little hat is a mason's tool. And once you finish college, you get a degree. Now let's talk about who really runs this world, shall we? Where do the politicians get their money to run for president? The banks? And who owns the banks? The Rothschilds and the 13 bloodlines. You do realize that the United States is not even allowed to print its own money, don't you? A foreign bank controls and prints our money. Not us. That foreign bank is called the Federal Reserve. And there is nothing federal about it. It is controlled by people like the Rothschilds. And you say that freedom isn't free. Well, slavery isn't free either, baby. Who did you think we were really fighting all these wars for? Truth, justice, and the American way. Well, let's just ask the Rothschilds and find out, shall we? The Rothschild matriarch once said, "If my sons did not want wars, there would be none." Remember how we were told after 9/11 that we were going to war to find weapons of mass destruction? Did you know that the Twin Towers were symbolic of the two Masonic pillars? Kind of reminds me of the Masonic duality of their black and white tiles. But did you know about the esoteric duality of red and blue? You know, like voting. And voting is supposedly about deciding who gets to make the laws, right? Well, let's see what the Rothschilds have to say about this as well, shall we? Let us control the money of a country, and we care not who makes its laws. But why stop there? Let's take a look at the greatest law of the land, the Constitution. The First Amendment is about freedom of the press. But is it really free? Let's see. Have you ever heard of Operation Mockingbird? Basically, the CIA can control the media, as in television and the film industry, to push propaganda on its own citizens. And guess who owns the media? Basically people like the Rothschilds. And I think there is only like 3 to 5 companies that control the media, including print, film, and television. And it is the same story with corporations on the whole, where companies like BlackRock and others have a piece of everything. So are you starting to get it? You need to see the big picture. They tell you what to think and say via the news. It's all programming, and it is all connected in what is becoming the beast system. There really is no difference between corporations, the media, the banks, and the government. It is an illusion of separation. But what it all boils down to is a small group of elites control everything. And they control you too. So we began this conversation by talking about red and blue pills. But the truth is that politics are just a placebo to pacify you into thinking you matter. You don't. You are just cattle to them, and you are all being herded and controlled. And the worst part is you actually think it is your idea, due to the programming you defend. Some dogs love their leash. And some people love to wear their medical mask like a muzzle. But this is where being able to critically think for yourself is so important. The fight with the world is not something you can win. All of this worldly power in the hands of fewer and fewer people is all leading up to the arrival of the Antichrist. But remember, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but with principalities and wickedness in high places. So let go of the illusion of politics. Let go of the world and free your mind, Neo. Free yourself from the Matrix.
In the darkest corners of ancient history, a name is whispered. It is a name synonymous with terror and forbidden rites. This name is Moloch. He is a figure shrouded in mystery, an entity that demanded the ultimate sacrifice from his followers. For centuries, his true identity has been a puzzle for historians and theologians alike. Who was this dark god? What power did he hold over the hearts and minds of ancient civilizations? The answers are buried deep within the sands of time, scattered across fragmented texts and the ruins of forgotten cities. His story is not just a relic of the past, it is a chilling exploration of human belief and the terrifying lengths to which it can be pushed. We journey back to a time of superstition and divine kings. In this world, gods walked among men, and the veil between the living and the dead was thin. Among the pantheon of deities, Molech stands apart. He was not a god of the harvest or the sky. He was a king of a different realm entirely. His domain was the underworld, the land of shadows and departed spirits. To approach him was to court death itself, yet people did approach him. They built high places in his honor and performed rituals that defy modern comprehension. They sought his favor, but the price he demanded was the most precious thing they could offer. The quest to understand Molech is a journey into the heart of fear. It forces us to confront the most unsettling aspects of ancient worship. Why would any society embrace a deity whose rituals were so grim? What desperation or belief could lead parents to commit the unthinkable in his name? These questions are not easily answered. The historical record is fragmented, and the biblical accounts are filtered through a lens of condemnation. To piece together the truth, we must become detectives, sifting through ancient Semitic languages, archaeological findings, and the cryptic verses of sacred texts. The trail is cold, but the shadow of Moloch looms large over the ancient Near East. Our investigation begins with a simple, yet profoundly complex word king. In Hebrew and other related languages, the letters MLK form the root of this title. But these same letters also form the name of our dark god, Moloch. This linguistic ambiguity is the key that unlocks the first door to his hidden world. Was he merely a king, a powerful human ruler deified by his people, or was he something more? Something older and far more sinister? As we will see, this confusion was no accident. It was a veil that concealed one of the most feared and powerful entities of the ancient world, a being whose influence stretched from Mesopotamia to the very gates of Jerusalem. The name Moloch echoes through the passages of the Old Testament, each mention a stark warning against idolatry. But the name itself is a source of great confusion. Ancient Semitic scripts, like Hebrew, were written without vowels. This leaves us with the consonant root MLK. Depending on the vowels one inserts, this root can mean Melech, the Hebrew word for king. It can also mean Malach, an angel or messenger. And most ominously, it can refer to the god Moloch. This ambiguity is not just a linguistic curiosity. It fundamentally changes our understanding of key historical texts. A verse condemning the worship of a foreign king takes on a much darker meaning if that king is actually a god of the underworld. Consider a passage from the prophet Isaiah. He condemns the people of Judah for their unfaithfulness. You journeyed to the king, MLK, with oil, the prophet declares, and sent down even to Sheol. Sheol is the Hebrew name for the realm of the dead, a shadowy, subterranean world. In this context, is Isaiah speaking of a mortal monarch, or is he making a veiled reference to Moloch, the entity whose very essence is tied to the netherworld? If it is the latter, the verse transforms from a political critique into a spiritual indictment of the highest order. The people were not just forming a misguided alliance, they were trafficking with the forces of death itself. This dark deity's first explicit appearance in the Bible is in the book of Leviticus. There God issues a clear and absolute command to the Israelites. They are strictly forbidden from giving their children as an offering to Moloch. The penalty for this act is death. This law, given to Moses around 1400 BC, suggests that the cult of Moloch was already a known and present danger. But his history stretches back even further, long before the Israelites entered the Promised Land. His cult is ancient, its roots reaching deep into the soil of Mesopotamia and Syria, 1,000 years before the time of Moses. Archaeologists have unearthed clues in the ruins of Ebla, a powerful kingdom in what is now northern Syria. In texts dating back to 3000 BC, we find a god called Malach. This name, another variation of MLK, appears frequently in personal names from the era. It tells us that this deity was not a minor figure. He was integrated into the very fabric of society, a familiar presence in the lives of the people. This ancient Malach, worshipped hundreds of years before the time of Abraham, appears to be an early form of the same entity who would later haunt the prophets of Israel. The Shadow King had been ruling his dark domain for a very long time. To truly grasp the horror associated with Moloch, we must confront the central practice of his cult child sacrifice. The Bible speaks of it with revulsion, describing it as the ultimate abomination. In the Valley of Hinnom, just outside the walls of Jerusalem, a place called the Topheth was established. It was here, the texts tell us, that followers would pass their sons and daughters through the fire as offerings to Molech. This ritual was not a secret hidden practice. It was known, and it was condemned repeatedly by Israel's prophets. King Solomon himself, in a shocking act of apostasy, built a high place for this very god. The act itself raises profound and disturbing questions. What could possibly motivate a parent to perform such a ritual? Some scholars suggest it was an act of extreme devotion, a way to appease a powerful and fearsome god during times of crisis, such as war or famine. By offering their most precious gift, their own child, worshippers may have believed they could secure divine favor or ward off catastrophic disaster. Others theorize that the ritual was connected to the cult of the dead. It may have been a way to communicate with or gain power from the spirits of the underworld, with Moloch acting as the gatekeeper. Despite the Bible's explicit descriptions, the physical evidence for child sacrifice in the Levant remains elusive. Archaeologists have excavated sites at Ugarit, Mari, and even near the Valley of Hinnom, but they have yet to uncover definitive proof of these fiery rituals, such as mass graves of infant bones showing signs of burning. This lack of evidence has led some scholars to question whether the biblical accounts are exaggerated, a form of religious propaganda designed to demonize the pagan practices of Israel's neighbors. Perhaps, they argue, passing through the fire was a symbolic purification rite, not a literal sacrifice. However, the consistency of the biblical testimony is difficult to dismiss. From Leviticus in 1400 BC to King Josiah's reforms in the 7th century BC, the condemnation of Moloch's cult is unwavering. The texts are clear that children were being burned as offerings. It is possible that the evidence has simply been lost to time or has yet to be discovered. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The specter of child sacrifice hangs over Moloch, defining his legacy as a god of unspeakable cruelty. Whether literal or symbolic, the act represented a fundamental violation of the sacred bond between parent and child, a taboo that placed Moloch outside the bounds of acceptable worship. Our investigation into the shadowy figure of Moloch begins not with a grand discovery of a lost city, but with a linguistic puzzle. It is a puzzle centered on three simple consonants, MLK. In the ancient world of the Near East, languages like Hebrew, Akkadian, and Ugaritic were written without vowels. This seemingly small detail creates a profound ambiguity that has stumped scholars for centuries. The letters MLK form the very foundation for several critical words. Add one set of vowels, and you get Melech, the common Hebrew word for a king, a sovereign ruler of a nation. It is a word that appears hundreds of times throughout the Old Testament, referring to figures like David, Solomon, and the pharaohs of Egypt. But with a different set of vowels, those same three letters, MLK, become Malak. This word translates to messenger or, in many contexts, an angel, a divine envoy sent from the heavens. This is the word used to describe the celestial beings who visited Abraham and wrestled with Jacob. The distinction between a king and a messenger is vast, one a terrestrial ruler, and the other a supernatural agent. Yet their written form in the original texts is identical. This overlap forces us to rely entirely on context to decipher the intended meaning, a task made difficult by the vast gulf of time and culture that separates us from the biblical authors. Then there is the third possibility, the one that leads us down a much darker path. With yet another vocalization, MLK becomes Moloch, the name of the dark god at the center of our inquiry. Suddenly, a simple reference to a king could be a veiled condemnation of a forbidden deity. This is where the enigma truly takes shape. When ancient scribes wrote of MLK, were they always referring to a human monarch? Or were there times when they meant the underworld god, a being whose worship was explicitly forbidden? The line between political commentary and spiritual warning becomes incredibly blurred, hiding the true extent of this entity's influence. This linguistic triad, king, messenger, god, is not merely an academic exercise. It is the key to unlocking the secret identity of Moloch. His name, or title, was deliberately woven into the very fabric of royal and divine language. This allowed his cult to persist, sometimes hidden in plain sight, within societies that were officially dedicated to other gods. Was Moloch simply another name for a powerful king who demanded divine honors? Or was he a supernatural force, a messenger from the depths whose title, king, signified his dominion over the realm of the dead? The ambiguity itself is a clue, suggesting a figure whose nature was intentionally obscured. The prophetic books of the Bible provide fertile ground for exploring this conundrum. The prophet Isaiah, who was a powerful voice in the kingdom of Judah during the 8th century BC, offers a really compelling case study. In a scathing rebuke of his people's spiritual corruption, he writes, "You journeyed to the king, with oil and multiplied your perfumes. You sent your envoys far off, and sent down even to Sheol." At first glance, this appears to be a condemnation of a foreign alliance. The kingdom of Judah, caught between the superpowers of Egypt and Assyria, often sought security through political treaties, which Isaiah saw as a betrayal of their trust in God. However, the final phrase of the verse, "and sent down even to Sheol," is a jarring detail. Sheol, in Hebrew thought, is the underworld, the shadowy abode of the dead. It's a place of darkness and silence, far removed from the political dealings of earthly kings. So why would a diplomatic mission to a human monarch involve sending envoys to the realm of the dead? The reference makes little sense in a purely political context. It introduces a supernatural element that seems out of place, pointing towards a meaning that lies deeper than a simple critique of foreign policy. The inclusion of Sheol is a deliberate choice, intended to evoke a sense of dread and spiritual transgression. This is where the alternate reading of becomes so potent. If we read the king not as but as Moloch, the entire passage transforms. The verse is no longer about a misguided political treaty, it becomes a horrifying accusation of necromancy and the worship of an underworld deity. You journeyed to Moloch with oil, and sent down even to Sheol. In this light, the journey is not to a foreign court but to a ritual site. The oil and perfumes are not diplomatic gifts but offerings for a dark god. The envoys sent down to Sheol are not ambassadors, they are participants in a rite designed to contact the dead. This interpretation aligns perfectly with what we know about the cults of the ancient Near East. Many pagan religions involve practices aimed at communicating with or appeasing the spirits of the deceased, who were believed to reside in the underworld. The king of this realm would naturally be the central figure in such rituals. By referencing both and Sheol in the same breath, Isaiah creates a powerful and chilling association. He is suggesting that the people of Judah are not just making bad political choices, they are actively engaging with the forces of death, seeking guidance and power from a forbidden underworld king. The Ammonites, Israel's neighbors in modern-day Jordan, worshipped Milcom, their national god, whose name is a variant of Moloch. The Bible often uses Milcom and Moloch interchangeably, highlighting their connection. King Solomon even built a high place for Milcom near Jerusalem, showing how close this worship came to Israel's heart. Ammonite names often included their gods, but surprisingly, El, not Milcom, was most common, suggesting El was the main focus in daily life. Milcom then was likely a title for El in his role as the national king, literally their king. The prophets of Israel twisted Milcom into Moloch, a wordplay that turned a title of honor into a term of shame. This linguistic move condemned the Ammonite god as a disgrace, not just a rival. The battle wasn't just against a foreign god but against a corrupted vision of kingship itself. Molech became a symbol of everything Israel's faith stood against. The name itself became a weapon in the war on idolatry. To trace Moloch's origins, we travel back to ancient Ebla and Mari in Mesopotamia and Syria, over 1,000 years before Moses. In Ebla, a god named Moloch, meaning king, was deeply woven into society, his name common in personal names. Moloch is the earliest known precursor to Moloch, already a kingly figure in the pantheon. There's no evidence of child sacrifice here, but the idea of a divine monarch was ancient and influential. In Mari, Moloch appears again, but now as a ruler of underworld spirits, a king with a ghostly court. This marks the first link between Moloch and the domain of the dead. Moloch wasn't a sky god but a sovereign of the afterlife, presiding over spirits in the netherworld. This tradition of an underworld king would echo for centuries, evolving into the Moloch condemned in the Bible. The roots of Moloch's dark reputation stretch deep into the earliest civilizations. The king of the dead was a persistent, haunting presence long before Israel's time. In Mari, Moloch's court was called the Maliku, an organized council of underworld spirits, not just random ghosts. This idea spread to Ugarit, where the MLKM were venerated as a powerful assembly of ancestral spirits. For centuries, kings honored these spirits in state rituals seeking legitimacy and blessings from the dead. The living king's authority was tied to the favor of the kings of the underworld. Moloch's cult then wasn't just about one god, it was about accessing this entire netherworld council. The Bible's prohibitions against Moloch often appear alongside bans on necromancy, revealing the true threat, a rival spiritual network. Building a high place for Moloch meant opening a channel to the underworld's power. This was a direct challenge to Yahweh's exclusive claim over Israel's destiny. Moloch represented a dangerous alternative source of guidance and power. The cult's real danger was its connection to the assembly of the dead. Ugaritic texts link Moloch, the underworld king, to Rapiu, the lord of the Rephaim ancient giants whose spirits ruled the afterlife. Rapiu and Moloch are likely two titles for the same entity, the king of the dead and the giants. Rituals call on Milku in Ashtaroth, the heart of Bashan, land of giants and gateway to the underworld. Bashan, ruled by King Og, was seen as the earthly seat of this underworld power. For Canaanites, Og was the viceroy of the netherworld god, ruling from the same cities as Rapiu. Moloch wasn't just a myth, he had a real-world throne in Bashan, with Og as his representative. Israel's conquest of Bashan was more than a military campaign, it was a spiritual battle against the gates of the underworld. The fight was against a god who claimed dominion over death, giants, and the land itself. Moloch's cult was rooted in geography, myth, and the fear of the dead. The struggle was for the soul of the land and its people. Defeating Og was a victory over the ancient lord of the dead. Despite vivid biblical condemnations, archaeologists haven't found clear evidence of child sacrifice at Moloch's ancient sites. Some scholars suggest the Bible may have exaggerated or misunderstood these rituals, perhaps confusing symbolic acts with literal sacrifice. Ugaritic texts describe offerings to ancestral spirits, not burning children, hinting at varied practices across cultures and eras. Still, the Bible's testimony is consistent. From Moses to Josiah, the cult of Moloch is condemned for child sacrifice. This tradition of denunciation spans over 800 years, longer than the time from the Reformation to today. The lack of physical evidence doesn't erase the power of the biblical narrative. For Israel, Moloch embodied the ultimate inversion, sacrificing life to the king of death. His cult was a direct affront to the god of life, seeking power from the realm of shadows. Moloch's worship was more than a foreign custom, it was a spiritual rebellion. The battle against Moloch was a fight for the very meaning of life and death. The laws given to Moses on Mount Sinai were not merely a social contract, they were a divine blueprint for a new kind of nation, one set apart from the practices of its neighbors. At the heart of these laws was a fierce prohibition against the worship of Moloch, a command that stood as a stark boundary between life and death. God's decree in the book of Leviticus is absolute and chillingly clear. Any Israelite or even a foreigner living among them who gives one of his children to Moloch must be put to death. This was not a minor infraction to be settled with a fine or a lesser sacrifice. It was a capital crime, a transgression so profound that it warranted the ultimate penalty from the community itself. The severity of this law underscores the horror with which this practice was viewed. The act of sacrificing a child was seen as a fundamental pollution of the sacred covenant between God and his people. It was an act that would make my sanctuary unclean and profane my holy name, as God himself declares. This was not just about the worship of a false god, it was about an act that struck at the very heart of creation and morality. It represented the ultimate betrayal of the gift of life, turning the parental instinct for protection into an instrument of death. The command for the people of the land to carry out the execution by stoning shows that this was a communal responsibility, a way to purge a deep spiritual stain from their midst. The divine warning went even further. God declared that if the community failed in its duty, if they turned a blind eye to a man sacrificing his child to Moloch, then God himself would intervene. I will set my face against that man and against his clan, the text warns. This is a terrifying promise of divine retribution, not just against the individual perpetrator, but against his entire family line. This extension of guilt to the whole clan reveals something crucial about the nature of the Moloch cult. It was not seen as a private act of a deranged individual, but as a familial practice, a dark inheritance that could corrupt generations and threaten the spiritual integrity of the entire nation. This concept of familial guilt points to the cult's deep roots in ancestor worship and the veneration of the dead. As we have seen, the worship of the underworld king was often a family affair, a way to secure blessings from or appease the spirits of one's lineage. By engaging in the ultimate act of devotion to the king of the dead, the sacrifice of a living child, a family was making a powerful and irrevocable pact with the netherworld. God's judgment against the entire clan was a direct response to this, breaking the chain of this dark tradition and severing the family's allegiance to the forces of death, realigning them with the God of life. The divine prohibitions in the Hebrew scriptures reveal a profound and deliberate connection between the cult of Moloch and the practice of necromancy. Immediately following the stern warnings against child sacrifice in Leviticus chapter 20, the text pivots to another set of forbidden activities. If a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. The placement of this command is no accident. The biblical author, under divine inspiration, is directly linking the act of sacrificing children to Moloch with the act of consulting the spirits of the dead. These were not two separate sins, they were two sides of the same dark coin. The Hebrew terms used here are specific and revealing. The The word for mediums refers to the spirits of the dead who were summoned for consultation, often through a ritual pit. This is the very word that connects back to the Hurrian underworld, from which the god Kumarbi, an entity we have identified with Moloch, was summoned. Necromancers, often translated as the knowing ones, were the human practitioners who claimed to have intimate familiarity with these spirits. To turn to them was to bypass God as the source of wisdom, and instead seek knowledge from the realm of the deceased, a realm ruled by Moloch. The book of Deuteronomy reinforces this connection with even greater detail. In a passage outlining the abominations of the Canaanite nations, the text begins with the prohibition against burning a son or daughter as an offering. It then immediately lists a series of forbidden occult practices: divination, fortune-telling, sorcery, charming, and once again consulting a medium or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. All of these activities were aimed at gaining secret information or manipulating spiritual forces. Child sacrifice appears at the head of this list, suggesting it was the ultimate ritual, the gateway act that fully initiated a person into this forbidden world of dark spirituality. This linkage suggests that sacrificing a child to Moloch may have been more than just an act of appeasement. It might have been the very mechanism by which practitioners believed they could open a powerful channel to the underworld. By offering a life, the most potent form of energy, to the king of the dead, they may have sought to compel the spirits to appear and divulge their secrets. The act was therefore not just murder, it was a high-stakes ritual of necromancy, an attempt to tear open the veil between worlds and gain power and knowledge that God had explicitly placed off limits. It was a direct challenge to divine authority, using death to traffic with the dead. The biblical emphasis on the Moloch cult as a transgression involving the entire family, or clan, becomes clearer when we understand its function. The text in Leviticus doesn't just condemn the individual, it promises to cut off him and all who follow him in whoring after Moloch. This phrasing implies a leader and his followers, a small cult cell often organized along family lines. This structure mirrors what we have learned from the texts of Mari and Ugarit, where the cult of the dead was fundamentally a family responsibility. The living patriarch was responsible for maintaining the proper rites for the dead patriarchs to ensure the family's continued prosperity and spiritual well-being. This ancient practice provides the context for the Moloch cult in Israel. It was a corruption of this widespread tradition of ancestor veneration. Instead of honoring their ancestors within the bounds of tradition, these families were pledging their allegiance to the ultimate ancestor, the king of eternity, Rapiu, the lord of the dead Rephaim. By sacrificing a child, the family was not just killing an individual, they were consecrating their entire lineage to the service of Molech. They were making a generational blood pact, dedicating their past, present, and future to the underworld king in exchange for his favor and the dark wisdom of his spirit court. The unifying principle behind God's condemnation in Leviticus chapter 20 is not simply a random list of bad things, it is a focused attack on the practice of the cult of the dead in all its forms. From the ultimate act of child sacrifice to the seemingly lesser act of consulting a medium, all these practices stemmed from the same polluted source: the belief that power, guidance, and blessing could be found among the dead rather than from the living God. The family that engaged in these rites was, in essence, choosing a different father for their clan, Moloch instead of Yahweh. They were grafting their family tree onto the stock of the underworld. This is why the punishment was so severe and so sweeping. It was a spiritual amputation designed to stop the spread of a deadly gangrene. By cutting off the man and his entire clan, God was preventing this dark allegiance from being passed down to subsequent generations. He was protecting the broader community of Israel from a spiritual disease that threatened to redefine the very nature of family, lineage, and worship. The war against Moloch was a war for the soul of the Israelite family, a battle to determine whether their ancestors would be honored in memory or worshipped in death. The prophet Isaiah provides one of the most haunting descriptions of the consequences for those who embrace this cult of the dead. He paints a desolate picture of souls lost in a self-inflicted darkness. When the people abandon God to inquire of the mediums and necromancers, those who chirp and mutter, they are making a fatal choice. Isaiah poses a devastatingly simple question: should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? The absurdity is, well, laid bare. They are seeking life from the domain of death, a futile and perverse inversion of the natural order. This act sentences them to a living death, a spiritual state of perpetual twilight. Isaiah describes their fate in vivid terms. They have no dawn. They are plunged into a world of distress, darkness, and the gloom of anguish. These are not just poetic metaphors for sadness, they are technical descriptions of the underworld. The practitioners become like the spirits they seek to control. They become hungry and distressed, just like the unfed ghosts of Mesopotamian lore who wander the earth in misery. They are thrust into thick darkness, the very essence of Sheol. The punishment for trafficking with the dead is to become like the dead, trapped in a shadowy realm, even while they still walk the earth. The prophet then delivers a crucial line, one that directly implicates the underworld king. In their rage and hunger, these lost souls will speak contemptuously against their king and their God. Given the context of consulting the dead, this verse cries out for a different translation. As some scholars have argued, it should be read not as cursing a human king and the true God, but as swearing by their demonic patrons, and they shall curse by Molech, and by their ghosts. The word Elohim, often translated as God, can also mean spirits or ghosts, as it does when the medium of Endor sees the spirit of Samuel rising from the earth. This reading reveals the terrifying endgame of the cult. The followers, trapped in the darkness they chose, do not repent. Instead, they double down on their allegiance, cursing their fate by the very names of the entities who led them to ruin, Moloch, their king, and the ghosts they so desperately sought to command. They are bound by their own dark oaths. Their attempt to gain power over the spirit world has resulted in their complete enslavement by it. Isaiah's prophecy is a chilling warning. Those who seek to command the voices from the dust will ultimately find that their own voice is lost in the eternal silent darkness. To fully unmask the entity known as Moloch, we must cast our net wider beyond the borders of Canaan and into the heartland of ancient Mesopotamia. Here in the pantheons of Akkad and Babylon we find a deity who mirrors Moloch with stunning precision. This god is Nergal, a figure of immense power and dread. Nergal's domain was multifaceted. He was the god of plague and pestilence, bringing sudden and horrific death to the world of the living. But his primary role, the one that defines his very essence, was his position as the great gatekeeper and king of the underworld. He ruled the land of no return, the dark destination of all mortal souls, a position he won through force and cunning. The parallels between Nergal and Moloch are striking and cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. Both are chthonic deities, their power intrinsically linked to death, the afterlife, and the subterranean realm. Both were feared more than they were loved, approached with grim rituals designed to appease their wrath rather than celebrate their benevolence. The connection, however, goes far beyond thematic similarity. Ancient Akkadian deity lists, the cuneiform equivalent of a theological dictionary, make the identification explicit. In these invaluable texts, scribes wrote the simple but profound equation: MOLOCK equals Nergal. The scholars of the ancient world saw them as one and the same entity. This linguistic and theological equation is a Rosetta Stone for our investigation. It confirms that Malak, the ancient precursor to Moloch, was understood to be the Semitic name for the great Mesopotamian underworld god. Furthermore, the very names themselves reinforce this identity. As we have established, the Semitic root MLK is the basis for the word king. In the Sumerian language, the logogram for Nergal's name, Ner.gal, literally translates to great king or simply king. The two names in two different languages mean the exact same thing and point to the same divine role, the sovereign of the netherworld. Moloch was not just a king, he was the king of the underworld. This identification with Nergal adds a terrifying new layer to the cult of Moloch in Israel. When the Israelites built high places to Moloch, they were not just worshipping a local Canaanite demon. They were, knowingly or not, tapping into a far older and more powerful tradition of underworld worship that stretched back to the dawn of civilization in Mesopotamia. They were venerating the god of plague, the lord of the realm of the dead, the divine gatekeeper who stood between the living and the spectral abyss. The sacrifice of children in this context becomes an even more sinister offering, a tribute paid directly to the ultimate master of death. Our trail now leads us to a strange and fascinating intersection of cultures, to the ancient Hurrian city of Urkesh in northern Syria. Around 2250 BC, a king named Tishatal laid the foundation for a grand temple in his city. In a foundation deposit, a stone tablet was placed bearing an inscription to commemorate the event. The inscription reads, Tishatal, king of Urkesh, has built a temple for Nergal. On the surface, this seems straightforward. A local king building a temple for the well-known Mesopotamian plague god. But the archaeologists who studied the inscription uncovered a much more complex reality, one that further solidifies the identity of our underworld king. The scholars concluded that the Sumerian logogram for Nergal was not being used to represent the name of the Mesopotamian god. Instead, it was functioning as a stand-in, a logographic symbol for a local Hurrian divine name. This was a common practice in the ancient world where scribes would use a familiar symbol to represent a foreign god with a similar function. The question then became, which Hurrian god was the true recipient of this temple? The extensive texts from the Hurrian civilization provide a clear answer. The only major deity known to reside at the city of Urkesh was none other than Kumarbi, the father of the gods in the Hurrian pantheon. This deduction led to a groundbreaking conclusion. The great temple of Urkesh was not for the Mesopotamian Nergal, but for the Hurrian god Kumarbi. The title Nergal, or king, was being used as an epithet for Kumarbi. This is the same Kumarbi we have met before, the god who usurped his father Anu and was later deposed by the storm god Teshub. He is the same deity who was summoned from the Abi, the Hurrian underworld, a term that is the linguistic ancestor of the Hebrew word for a ritual pit, Obi, and the spirits of the dead, Obat. The connection is honestly becoming undeniable. The Hurrian underworld god was identified by the title king. Now we can connect the dots in a direct line. We know from Akkadian texts that MOLOCK equals Nergal. We now know from the Urkesh inscription that Kumarbi equals Nergal as a title. Therefore, by simple substitution, we can infer that the entity known as MOLOCK or Moloch is one and the same as the Hurrian god Kumarbi. This is a crucial link in the chain of identity. Moloch is not just a generic king of the underworld, he is the specific Hurrian deity whose mythology involves castration of the sky god, battles with the storm god, and a deep, intrinsic connection to the ritual summoning of spirits from the deep earth. Based on this web of interconnected evidence, a new hypothesis emerges, one that really reframes our entire understanding of this dark deity. What if Moloch, like the name Baal, was never a proper name to begin with? Baal simply means lord or master, and it was used as a title for various gods, most famously, the storm god Hadad. I propose that Moloch functioned in the exact same way. It was not a personal name, but a title, derived from the Semitic root, meaning king. And it was not a generic title, but a very specific one, king of the underworld. This title was applied to the same rebellious entity across multiple cultures, an entity known to us by many other names. This theory elegantly explains the various forms of the name we encounter: Malak in Ebla, Milcom of the Ammonites, the Phoenician god Melkart of Tyre, whose name by the way means king of the city, and the biblical Moloch are all variations on a theme. They are all local manifestations of a single powerful being who claimed kingship over the realm of the dead. This also clarifies his identification with Nergal, the great king of the Mesopotamian underworld, and Kumarbi, the king god of Urkesh, who was summoned from the depths. They are not a confusing jumble of different gods. They are different cultural masks worn by the same supernatural entity. This entity is the dark heart at the center of our entire investigation, the fallen watcher angel who has appeared under a host of aliases: Shemihaza, the leader of the rebellion; El, the deposed Canaanite father god; Enlil, the Sumerian god of the air who brought the flood; Dagon, the Philistine grain god with underworld connections; and Assur, the warrior god of Assyria. The title, King of the Underworld, is another of his dreadful mantles, one that specifically highlights his dominion over the spirits of the deceased Nephilim and his role in the forbidden practice of necromancy. He is the ultimate lord of the dead. This understanding also illuminates the nature of the Ammonite national god. As we've seen, scholars conclude that Milcom was simply a title meaning their king, used to refer to their chief god, El. This solidifies the link. The Ammonite king was El, who we have already identified as a primary identity of this fallen watcher. The Hebrew prophets, in their inspired wisdom, recognized this. They took the title, distorted it to signify shame, and condemned his cult, the cult of El, the king of the underworld, which demanded the ultimate sacrifice and offered in return only the dark whispers of the dead. The web of connections surrounding our underworld king extends even further, drawing in the fearsome giant clans of Canaan. One of the most intriguing and honestly speculative pieces of this puzzle comes from an unexpected source, the very name of the Anakim. These were one of the giant tribes that so terrified the Israelite spies sent to scout the Promised Land. The name Anakim is thought by many scholars to derive from the Greek word which means king, lord, or god. This was a title of great honor, famously applied to Agamemnon, the High King who led the Greek forces in the Trojan War. Even more significantly, it was used as an epithet for Zeus Anax, to denote his supreme status as the overlord of the entire Greek pantheon. This linguistic link opens up a fascinating possibility. What if the Anakim were not named after a literal biological ancestor named Anak? What if instead they were named for the supernatural entity they served? If the chief deity of the region, the entity known to the Ammonites as Milcom and to the Canaanites as El, was understood as the great, the high king of the cosmos, then it stands to reason that his dedicated warrior caste would be known as the Anakim. Literally, the men of the Anaks or the people of the High King. This would parallel other ancient naming conventions, where a people and their chief god shared a name, like the Assyrians and their god Assur. This reinterpretation changes how we read key biblical passages. The phrase descendants of Anak, found in the Book of Numbers, might not refer to a genetic lineage at all. Instead, it could be a socio-religious designation, much like the term sons of the prophets referred to a school of prophets, not their literal offspring. In the same way, the descendants of the giant, who were defeated by David and his mighty men, were the last remnants of the warrior cult dedicated to the Rephaim. The Anakim, therefore, would be the elite servants of the supernatural, the entity we have identified as Milcom or El, the so-called king of the underworld. This theory, while speculative, fits neatly with the geographical evidence. The ancient Egyptian execration texts, which list enemies of the state, appear to place the Anakim in the Transjordan region. This is the precise area where we have already established the flourishing of cults dedicated to this entity under his various titles, El, Milcom, Moloch, and Baal Peor. The Anakim were not just random giants occupying the land, they were the guardians of the High King's territory, the fearsome enforcers of his chthonic religion, strategically positioned in the very lands that Israel was commanded to possess. Their presence was a direct challenge to the authority of Yahweh. This proposed connection between the Anakim and the underworld king, El or Moloch, provides a powerful explanation for another biblical mystery, the explicit link between the Anakim and the Rephaim. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 11 states that the Anakim also are accounted Rephaim. The text doesn't say they were literal Rephaim, but that they were accounted as or considered to be Rephaim. This suggests a functional or spiritual association rather than a purely biological one. If the Rephaim were the demonic spirits of the dead Nephilim and their lord was Ratbiu or Moloch, then the Anakim, as the dedicated servants of this same king, would naturally be associated with his spirit army. They were the living embodiment of the Rephaim's power on earth. This framework provides a chilling new context for Israel's conquest of Canaan. The entity at the heart of our study, the fallen watcher Shemihaza or El, was the one who led the original rebellion that created the Nephilim. Those Nephilim, upon their deaths in the Great Flood, became the disembodied and malevolent Rephaim spirits. The Anakim, as the men of the High King, were the earthly agents of this same rebellious entity, continuing his ancient war against the divine plan. Their purpose was to hold the Promised Land for their dark master, turning it into a stronghold of underworld worship and necromantic practice, a profane mirror of the kingdom of God. This understanding illuminates the military strategy of Joshua with crystal clarity. Upon entering Canaan, Joshua's primary focus was not simply to conquer territory, it was to systematically eradicate the Anakim. The book of Joshua records his campaign with precision, and Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. He made it his first and most critical objective to eliminate the strongholds of the men of the High King. It was a targeted spiritual strike aimed at decapitating the earthly leadership of the enemy. The war for Canaan was therefore a direct confrontation with the kingdom of the underworld king. The Anakim were not just formidable human adversaries, they were the gatekeepers, the sacred warriors of Moloch guarding his holy sites and his entry points to the world of the living. By destroying them, Joshua was not merely clearing the land for settlement. He was closing the portals. He was cleansing the land of a deep, ancient spiritual corruption that had been festering since before the flood. It was a holy war in the truest sense, a battle to reclaim the land for the god of life from the servants of the king of death. It remains one of history's most unsettling questions. How could the cult of an underworld god, defined by necromancy and the sacrifice of children, persist for 800 years within the heartland of Israel and Judah? The answer, it seems, lies in the profound and terrible allure of the king of the dead. Moloch, the entity wearing countless masks, El, Kumarbi, Nergal, Milcom, did not offer blessings of the harvest or the sky. He offered something far more seductive to those facing desperation and death, a promise of control. He offered the forbidden knowledge of the spirit realm, the power to commune with the deceased, and a perceived mastery over fate itself, a shortcut to the wisdom and power that only God should provide. This dark promise was a spiritual poison that seeped into the very foundations of the nation, from the common family practicing ancestral rites to the highest levels of the monarchy. King Solomon, the wisest of all men, fell prey to this temptation, building a sanctuary for the underworld king on a hill overlooking Jerusalem itself. This act stands as a stark testament to the seductive power of this ancient entity. If Solomon could be deceived, then honestly no one was truly safe. The cult of Moloch endured because it preyed upon the most fundamental human fears: the fear of the unknown, the fear of powerlessness, and the terror of oblivion. It offered a tangible, albeit horrific, way to confront the abyss. The long and bloody history of Moloch worship serves as more than just a grim historical footnote. It is an enduring warning, a timeless parable about the profound dangers of seeking power outside of the divine order. The path to the underworld, though it promises secrets and sovereignty, leads only to darkness and despair. The story of Moloch is a testament to the fact that some doors are forbidden for a reason, and the entities that wait behind them do not offer partnership, only eternal servitude. The king of the dead demands a price that no mortal can afford to pay, for his kingdom is built not on life and creation, but on shadow and ruin. Ultimately, the battle against Moloch was a war for the soul of a people, a conflict fought not just on the battlefields of Canaan but in the valleys outside Jerusalem and in the deepest recesses of the human heart. His shadow, though vanquished from the high places of Israel, lingers as a caution against the timeless temptation to seek the living among the dead. The chronicle of this dark king is a chilling reminder that the greatest deceptions are often cloaked in titles of honor, and the most dangerous paths are those that promise a crown in exchange for one's soul. The king of the underworld is always waiting for new subjects.